I'm Aditya. I am currently a developer advocate at Appright. I also work as a hackathon coach with Major League Hacking, and I have been a part of Twilio's Champions program for a while now. And just aside from that, in my free time, I love working with .NET. I love learning more, exploring, working with APIs, working with cross-platform apps, and yeah, that's a little bit about me. Now, before I jump in, I do want to mention if anyone wants to click pictures and post about them, clicking and sharing is highly encouraged. So if anyone wants to do that, please feel free to do so. That's going to be totally all right. Now, if I talk about the session that we have here and the content we're going to discuss, I think the session title was rather self-explanatory, but just to cover the agenda once, we're going to be talking a little bit about cognitive services, the suite of services that this offers, the sort of APIs it offers. Aside from that, we will bring a special focus towards the computer vision API, and that is primarily because the demo we have will comprise the computer vision API. So I'll give a little brief introduction to that as well. Aside from that, we will discuss what .NET MAUI is, what it enables you to do. I will cover that in brief rather than in detail because I know there is a dedicated session on .NET MAUI in the C# and .NET track as well tomorrow if I'm not wrong. So I will give a brief introduction to that. And after that, we will go ahead and explore the example app that I have that you can look at as well. So yeah, first up, let's talk about Azure Cognitive Services. Just before I jump into this, is there anyone here who is aware of what cognitive services is? We have a few folks here. Um, have you tried it out in the past as well? Have you tried it in the past as well? Ah, okay, nice. What about you, sir? Have you had a chance to work with cognitive services in the past as well? Oh, wow, that's amazing. That's actually wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, Now, it's great to hear about your experiences, but I do believe for a lot of folks, this might be their first introduction to what cognitive services is. Let me hop ahead and tell you a little bit about that. So, Azure Cognitive Services is, well, a cloud-based set of services with REST APIs and SDKs that lets you build in cognitive intelligence into your applications. In simple words, what that means is you can add um, cognitive features meaning abilities around speech, vision, and so on. And you can do this and add these features into your applications without actually having any AI or data science skills, which is actually really interesting, right? Because like for me, I like working with APIs, but I can't figure out the statistics behind a lot of this work. That's beyond me. But that's exactly what cognitive services enables. As I've already talked about one of the benefits, let me jump into a few more that cognitive services has. First thing, it is customizable. You can create customizable pre-trained models with the AI research. It's built on the foundations of the AI research that Microsoft has been doing for a while. It's really, really convenient because you can deploy cognitive services anywhere across the world, whether it's, from the cloud, whether it's on the edge. Um, the good thing is, like, for example, if you ever look at cognitive services or with other Azure services, you would notice they've got different regions available, right? Yeah, you can essentially deploy cognitive services resources across any of those. Next up, as I've been touting from the beginning, you need absolutely no ML expertise. I, for example, have absolutely none, and yet I have been able to build ML-enabled applications, AI-enabled applications using cognitive services because that's how easy it makes life for you if you ever want to do that. And last but by no means the least, cognitive services is developed with the strict ethical standards, and it does prioritize on empowering and enabling responsible usage of AI across the industry, and that has been a priority that Microsoft has had for a long while. So it does follow very, very strict ethical standards that way. Now, I did mention that cognitive services is a suite of cognitive features, right? Let's learn a little more about what these categories, what these types of services are. Like for example, first up, we've got vision. And you can imagine that we'll be talking about vision because I already mentioned we'll be touching the computer vision API, right? But even aside from the computer vision API, which they use to analyze content in images and video files, you've also got custom vision, which lets you actually create customizable image recognition models. You've got the face API, which is used to detect emotions in faces of people. And aside from that, it can be used to check whether you've got the same face across. So fun fact, Uber actually used the face API for onboarding of their drivers for their authentication and recognition, and that's a case study you can actually check out on the Microsoft website right now as well. Then of course, we've got speech, which includes speech to text, transcribing audible speech. You've got text to speech similarly. Speech translation is available. Speaker recognition is also now available, where you can actually detect people based on voice. That's a service that has been made available now as well. They've got the language APIs, which features language understanding, or LUIS, which lets you build in natural language into your applications. What that means is you could essentially build specific pieces of data. There is a content moderator which detects offensive or unwanted content. There is a personalizer which is used for creating personalized experiences across user bases. If there's anyone working in the customer data space as well, that might be something that you've heard of. The search APIs are there, which actually feature a variety of Bing-based APIs, ranging from news search to image search, web, auto-suggest, and so on. So that way, cognitive services is actually a really, really vast suite. And it's very, very handy to use. Coming to the API that I mentioned, the API in focus, that is the computer vision API. This is one that we're going to be looking at later on as well. And Azure's computer vision service here, it does give you access to algorithms that process images and return information based on them. One of the biggest features of, of the computer vision API is their optical character recognition API, or OCR, which lets you extract text from images. And with the new read API they have as a within their OCR offering, you can not just detect printed text but also handwritten text, which is incredibly difficult because just for context, is there anyone who knows why you can never get a perfect handwritten text match anywhere? If you ever try OCR on handwritten text, it's impossible to get a perfect match 100% of the times. Exactly. You can't have all of this text available across the internet, right? It's going to be different. So they've, the read API is surprisingly accurate with handwritten text as well. And it doesn't just support English, but multiple languages beyond as well. Then, after that, we've got image analysis, which lets you extract features from images such as objects, faces, text descriptions, and so on, which is, again, very, very convenient. If you're working with an application, let's say, for example, for folks who might be differently enabled, right? Something like image analysis could really, really help you build tools to work with data in real time and extract and share that information. The face API does technically fall under their computer vision offering as well, and it allows you to detect, recognize, and analyze faces in images. As we mentioned, that Uber has used this in their for the drivers as well. And even aside from that, facial recognition software is pretty important across scenarios, such as identity verification, touchless access, face blurring for privacy, right? That's something that you could enable with the face API as well if you're working on any privacy-centric applications. And then last but not the least, we've got spatial analysis, which lets you analyze and presence movement of people, distancing and so on across video feeds. And based on analysis of space essentially, it will give you responses and produce events that you can have other systems respond to. A few things about the computer vision API are that if you are working with images, the image does need to be one of the conventional formats like JPEG, PNGs, GIFs, or bitmap BMP files. At this moment, you do need the file to be less than 4 MB, and the minimum size of the image should be 50 by 50 pixels. For the read API, that is capped at 10,000 by 10,000 as well. which probably most of us aren't actually hitting in most cases, if I'm honest. So I think it's a fairly good range for you to work with if you ever plan to. Having talked about cognitive services, let's talk about MAUI. Quick question, is there anyone who's aware of what .NET MAUI is? Is there anyone aware of what Xamarin was, by any chance? Um, yeah. So Xamarin basically was a cross-platform framework that let you work and build applications across. And the thing with Xamarin was, it was initially its own organization, its own entity, and it used Mono, but Xamarin's internal runtime and solution was basically built on .NET Framework 4. And till last year, that was what Xamarin used. This year, though, Xamarin has entirely been merged into the .NET SDK and is now called MAUI, or multi-application UI. So, and then with multi-platform application UI, that's the full form. And in its essence, it is a cross-platform framework that lets you build mobile and desktop applications with C# and XAML. So if anyone's aware of Flutter or React Native here, chances are that there might be a few folks aware of that. MAUI is another solution you could work with, which lets you work with a C# code base, which of course has a lot of its benefits, primarily being that it has a C# and a .NET based code base, right? Because the C# community, the C# ecosystem is so extensive, it lets you work across systems and solutions, and it'll definitely enable your team a lot more if you're working with .NET already. And with MAUI right now, you do have support for Android, iOS, Tizen, Samsung Tizen, you've got Mac OS, you've got Windows. So you could essentially build applications across all of these platforms and essentially allow a write once, run anywhere experience, right? Currently, MAUI does support .NET 6, and I know .NET 7 is in preview, so by the time .NET Conf happens later this year, .NET 7 support should also be rolled out. And they've got individual frameworks across the MAUI offering. So just for example, we had Xamarin.iOS to build iOS apps. You've got .NET for iOS now. Xamarin.android is now .NET for Android. You've got .NET for Mac OS as well, which uses Mac Catalyst. You've got, and for Windows applications, it is using WinUI 3. So all of these frameworks all use the .NET 6 base class library. And this will allow you to abstract away the underlying platform entirely from, your code. And it's going to use the .NET runtime to provide an execution environment. I'm not going to go into too much more detail because I know there's going to be a dedicated session on this as well. But that being said, .NET MAUI is definitely very handy to work with. If you've worked with Xamarin, you will like this a lot more. There has been a massive focus on developer experience with MAUI's upgrades. Resource management has become far, far easier as well. You can now use declarative UIs as well. That's entirely an option. So MAUI is definitely a really good solution for you to work with if you want to work on cross-platform applications. Now, I did mention that after covering all of these topics, we're going to have a little example app that we'll work with as well, right? So for this application, we're going to be basically building an application that clicks a picture of any piece of text and extracts and shows it in the app. Now, for this, I do have a GitHub link that I will be sharing with you just after this. So if you want to follow along, you can do that, and you can work on it later on in your own free time as well. In the meantime, though, in order to build this sort of an app, the prerequisites that you would need would be an Azure account, of course, and you would have to create a computer vision resource on your Azure portal. It could be a free resource, you could go with paid, either way is fine, whatever works for you. We, at the end of the day, essentially just need the API key and the endpoint that it offers. Next up, the MAUI application that we have is .NET 6 based, so it would be good to have .NET 6 installed on your systems as well. And we would need the latest versions of Visual Studio IDE for that. Just to clarify once again, it is the Visual Studio IDE and not VS Code. I know that is a question that comes across a lot, but at the moment, in order to build MAUI applications, you will need the IDE. VS Code will not do. So yeah, the IDE is going to be necessary. And within that, So if anyone's worked with Visual Studio IDE, you would probably know that it offers quite a variety of workloads, whether to build internet-based applications, whether to work with Azure Cloud Services and build those SDKs, whether to build desktop applications. There is similarly a workload for MAUI applications as well, and that's another thing you will need, because it's gonna not just add all the necessary dependencies for you to build a MAUI application, it'll also give you a vast variety of templates that you can use across all of these platforms. So those are the prerequisites if you want to work with a MAUI application and at least build this particular one. So next up, firstly, of course, we need to create a computer vision resource, right? You can do that by just going ahead to your Azure portal and searching. And once you do that, you'd probably come across one of these pages where you've got to mention a resource name. It'll ask you for your resource group, your region, and so on. It's a very simple setup in general, pretty straightforward. The only thing I will, recommend you all to keep an eye out on is that whenever you're creating a computer vision resource, you could just directly go ahead and review and create it after this first page, after you've checked the responsible AI notice. But make sure to give a look at the networking settings once, because some of your applications you will want to expose across public networks, some cases you might not, right? And it's good to be wary about that. If you're working on a private network and you want to make sure that your computer vision resource is not exposed publicly, just be mindful about that. That being said, I've got the GitHub link here before we talk about the application. So if anyone wants to get that open, I've got the QR as well and the GitHub link. So whatever works for you should be good. I'm going to take 15 seconds or so to just to make sure everyone's got this, captured and ready. Whew. Yeah, so once that is done, once you've got this repository open, you should see an application there which is built and ready. Just an easy way to understand the application is if you enter the CSharpCorner 2022 demo directory within that repository, you will come across quite a few different files. One of them being mainpage.xaml and mainpage.xaml.cs. That is where we've written the code for running these functionalities. That is the landing page, essentially, the first page that we come across. So at the moment, I would recommend you folks to take a look at that first before anything else, because that's going to help you follow along with the examples and the code that I show you after this. So the XAML essentially is called Extensible Application Markup Language. It is an extension of the XML format you might have come across, and it is a markup language that lets you design UIs for applications using MAUI or WinUI, or in the past UWP as well. You also used XAML across WPF and its later editions and so on. So XAML is a markup language that lets you design a UI. For this application, the UI I designed was pretty simple. It's just a picture along with a capture image and an extract text button. The picture is the picture you will be clicking through the application, and well, the extract text button will extract the text and give you the response, right? Along with that, we also have a helper file in this application under the helpers folder, which is basically where you would add your API key and endpoint. And this is just for reference because we're going to be looking at code later on and referencing to this. But I wanted to not hard code my API key into, well, the functions directly. In the future, what I do recommend though is, in any case, in anywhere, wherever you have API keys or private information, at least with .NET-based applications or any mobile applications or so on, please do use Web API backends. That is something that I highly recommend because you can keep this information a lot more secure in environment variables and so on. That's not necessarily as easy to do when you're on a mobile application on a local device where you've got all the information stored, right? So yeah, that's a recommendation from a security perspective. Coming to the main page.xaml.cs, the first major function you will see is the capture image function, which uses the media picker in MAUI to capture a file. If anyone was a Xamarin developer, you may have been aware of the media plugin by James Montemagno, which basically let you capture pictures or pick out files. Um, Now, with Maui, they actually merged that functionality into Maui's essentials. So you can actually do that directly with, Maui's inbuilt libraries. So it is pretty simple that way. The media picker lets you capture a file, and after that, what we've just done is we've created a local path and saved the bit stream of this image locally to ensure that this image can be accessed later on as well. The one thing I will note is the file path variable at the bottom. That is a global variable across this class, and that is just there so that we can store this file path and use it later on across another function, because we don't have a direct call from this function into this extract text function. I kept a dedicated button and an event for that. So we are keeping this the local file path stored separately in another variable in the meantime. But otherwise, this code here is majorly boilerplate. You can actually go to the .NET MAUI documentation and find this as well. Next up, we've got the extract text functionality, which is using the computer vision SDK here, which is available for .NET. So what here we're going to do is we're going to use the credentials of our cognitive service resource, and we will authenticate our client first with that. The SDK has a provision for that. As you can see at the top, we've got the computer vision client, which is being authenticated with these credentials. Now, after that, the computer vision API has a two-step flow. The first step of this flow is to send the image data over to the API. It is then processed and sends back a header, which contains the location detail, which you can then again hit later on to get back your response. So there is a two-step approach here with the computer vision API, and that is basically because it needs more processing time. So it chooses to keep this function a little more async, and they've stored the response at a separate location. We've got our thread going off to sleep for a small little period of time, and then we send a call back again. So that is something to keep in mind whenever you use the computer vision API. It is going to be a two-step approach. It's not just going to be you hit the API and you get back the response. So in the first step, we essentially send the file, the byte stream, the byte array, the stream of this image that we've clicked, and we send that over to the computer vision API. We get back a location which is stored in the operation location string there. We then put the thread to sleep for just a couple of seconds while we wait for this to end. And after that, we again hit the API with this location in mind to get back our response. After that, we've just gone through this entire response that we've received, and in the text URL file results, and then we just iterate through this to get back all the different lines of extracted from this text. So if we look at this application, the way it's going to run is you capture an image. We've got the text there. It's going to click a picture. You can click a picture, and the moment you extract text, just wait for a couple of seconds, and you will see a display alert pop up, which has our output there. So yeah, it's pretty simple that way. It's a very comfortable experience, and just with a few lines of code, we've basically built an application that can extract text from handwritten stuff. Another fun solution that I just wanted to showcase, aside from the computer vision API, was one that I built with the Face API a little while back with Xamarin and Face API. And what this did is, it clicked a picture of a person, took their facial information, extracted the predominant emotion, and then placed an emoji on top. So that way, you can actually build really, really fun and handy solutions with the Face API and with cognitive services in general. And by the way, the GitHub link for that is available there as well. So if you want to look at that, you can do so later on. So yeah, those were a few fun use cases of cognitive services and how you could use those with Maui and build AI-enabled applications. And that's about it for me. Thank you so much. By the way, if anyone wants to connect with me, I've got my Twitter handle there as well. You can look at that if you want. I've also got my website, which has all my other socials. So feel free to connect with me over there. Does anyone have any questions in the meantime? Yeah, I'll just take this and then you.
I am Aryan from Bharati Vidyapeeth. So basically, I have a question like how is the cognitive services is different from OpenCV and MediaPipe? Like we have few inbuilt libraries also in Python or
Right,
MediaPipe. So
yeah.
for face recognition, it's a cascade classifier. So like we can easily detect the face using cascade. So how is the cognitive services is more easy and beneficial for us?
So just a question, because I'm not a Python developer myself. If you're working with OpenCV, would you have to define the logic for extraction of this information, detection, and so on your own, manually? Just a question there.
No. We can simply call out the function from the library, inbuilt libraries we are having. So as I told, like for detecting out the face, we have cascade. So we just have to call the library and we have to put the image path and easily we can detect out the face.
Okay. Are these libraries available across languages other than Python?
Yes, it's available in C Sharp, Python, and I might guess like it's also available in C.
And that's particularly for, and this is dedicatedly computer vision based, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So with OpenCV, I personally haven't done a benchmark across, and comparison across handwritten text. I think that would be something to compare with. Beyond that, because cognitive services is a vast suite that goes beyond vision, and I think a lot of the services involved here, whether it's LUIS, which lets you enable and implement natural language processing, or if we're talking about the decision APIs, you probably wouldn't get as simple an experience as consuming REST APIs across all of these, right? Like OpenCV is one example, which is pretty cool, but you may not get that same experience across this entire suite. So that way, I think with cognitive services, it will make the friction point between implementing AI within your applications a lot simpler across a variety of use cases for a lot of people that way.
Answer one last question. Like, could we change out the algorithm working behind the cognitive services?
So I do believe cognitive services offers you customizability to an extent, yes. There are a few different models that they have worked on in the past. I would say that that is something that we can explore once. It should be possible. And there are some services for sure that let you train a lot more manually, right? Like when I talk about Louise and with the bot maker, I know that lets you take a lot more custom input. Custom vision purely takes your own information for you to build a custom model there. So in quite a few services, yes, there is more customizability. In some, relatively a little lesser.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
I think I saw a question from you as well.
Hey, hello, I'm Akshay. So my question is, how are MAUI apps better than progressive web apps? Or is this like a C++ versus Python or Java something sort of question?
So with the progressive web app, you're essentially taking the web experience and allowing that on your local systems, right? With MAUI, you're building fully native applications. So it's a little more closer to building something like a dedicated native Android app and so on. So that way, these aren't hybrid apps. Although you can do that with MAUI now. With Blazor support, you can actually build hybrid apps as well, similar to what you would be doing with Electron. But using MAUI this way will let you and provide you a dedicated native experience. So if you want to work with native APIs on your system and so on, MAUI will enable you to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We had a question there as well. I think we can take this one and then probably move forward. So if anyone has further questions, we can take those afterwards as well. But I'll take this one last question now.
Thank you. So how's the support for this OCR in cognitive service in Indian languages? So does this work on Indian languages?
I do believe that they have support beyond English as well.
Okay.
So there should be support across quite a few vernaculars, but I will have to check which ones. I'm not 100% sure on that. But yes, I do know that they do claim that the read API works beyond English as well. So we can definitely explore that. I'll actually look into that and get back to you once a little later today as well, if that's all right.
Thanks. That works.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and hope you all have a fun conference.